We needed standoff. We needed quick responsiveness. We needed an all-weather capability. A long-range interceptor. That's what we achieved in the F-4.
If you had it to do all over again, change the design of the F-4?
No, I wouldn't change a thing.
Phantom 1 is with you off March, VFR 6.5 to Chino. 904, Phantom 1 with a flash.
Legends aren't born, they are made. And all heroes have an origin story. In the beginning, it was a plane that no one really wanted. It was, alternately, a brilliant design and a flawed one. When it first went to war, the enemy seemed to have its measure, and for most of its life, it was technically obsolete. but somehow, by the end, it was the frontline fighter for 12 different countries. One of the most successful and battle-proven warplanes of the Jet Age, enshrined as an aviation legend, and both symbol and icon of the Cold War. More than 60 years and 3 generations of technology after it first flew, it still flies in active duty with the air forces of 4 nations. Just how did this airplane, which, even at the best of times, inspired both love and hate among its pilots, come to be one of the most accomplished, recognized, praised, and even beloved aircraft in history? Well, that is the mystery and the story of the Phantom. It was a different time and a different era. It was the 1950s, and the Cold War was heating up. The United States and the Soviet Union, the world's 2 nuclear-armed superpowers, were locked in a life-or-death struggle of mutually incompatible economic, political, cultural, and social systems. The Soviet Union occupied half of Europe, and its massive army stood posed and ready to seize the other half, most of whose nations had joined together with the United States in the defensive NATO alliance. In Asia, China had fallen to a communist revolution, and both China and the Soviet Union actively supported communist revolutionary groups and movements around the world. The Cold War was cold only by the thinnest sense. Both sides had already fought each other through proxy nations in the Korean War, and every new incident or crisis might easily lead to World War III and nuclear Armageddon. As the Cold War entered its second decade, the United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a rapidly accelerating arms race, with each pouring fantastic sums into the development of atomic weapons, long-range heavy bombers to deliver them, and rockets and missiles of every kind. Every new development by one side prompted a counter-response by the other, and thus was the Phantom born. By the mid-1950s, the Soviets had developed 2 formidable long-range bombers, the Tupolev Tu-16, codenamed Badger by NATO, and the gigantic Tupolev Tu-95 Bear. Both were capable of delivering conventional and nuclear weapons. However, what was especially worrying, at least to the United States Navy, was that the Soviets were beginning to equip them with a dangerous new weapon. Guided long-range cruise missiles, capable of attacking ships from beyond the range of their defenses. To counter this threat, the Navy wanted an all-weather, day or night, high-altitude supersonic interceptor, capable of engaging Soviet bombers from beyond visual range, using the new Sparrow radar-guided air-to-air missile. In 1955, the Navy issued a list of requirements and invited interested manufacturers to develop a prototype for competitive selection. McDonnell-Douglas, one of the top aerospace firms in the nation, took on the contract and assigned the project to engineer David S. Lewis. Lewis's team delivered the XF-4H-1, which first flew in May of 1958. In December, the Navy selected the F-4 as its new interceptor, with an initial contract for 45 aircraft, the F-4A, for testing and training. The new aircraft needed a name. Two top-running suggestions were Mithras and Satan. Instead, McDonnell-Douglas settled on Phantom II, extending the lineage of the Phantom I, the first jet to operate from an aircraft carrier. In time, the Phantom II would simply become the Phantom, even though its official designation remained. Soon, the Phantom also gained the first of what would be a long list of nicknames and a representative mascot, Spooky, the creation of company mechanical designer and artist Anthony Wong. At the heart of the Phantom was a rugged titanium frame and twin General Electric J-79 afterburning turbojets, each producing over 16,000 pounds of thrust. Together, they gave the Phantom an astounding climb rate of 41,000 feet per minute, a ceiling of over 60,000 feet, and a maximum level speed of Mach 2.3. 1,470 miles per hour. The complexities of airflow led to the Phantom's distinctive air intakes, with their massive splitter plate, designed to direct boundary layer airflow into the intakes at high speed. The prototype Phantom experienced problems with stability at near stall speeds and high angles of attack. Lewis's engineers fixed these problems by giving the outer wings a dogtooth setback and 12 degrees of dihedral, an upward tilt, and the tailplanes 23 degrees of anhedral, a downward tilt. An early upgrade to the Phantom's powerful onboard radar required a lengthening and widening of the radome, giving it a slightly bulbous look. The Phantom had to have the internal space, power, and cooling systems to support an extensive suite of sensors, weapons, navigational systems, and electronic warfare equipment. This led directly to the first of two controversial Navy requirements: a two-man crew to handle the workload that all these systems imposed. The second controversial requirement was that the Phantom would not carry a gun. The logic behind this decision seemed sound at the time, even at slow speeds, hitting a target maneuvering in 3 dimensions while firing from a platform also moving in 3 dimensions was simply a challenge that few pilots ever mastered. At supersonic speeds, the odds of success were, statistically speaking, 0. Furthermore, the Phantom had only one job: to detect and engage enemy aircraft from beyond visual range. So, why waste precious space and weight on bringing a gun to a missile fight? Information and experience gathered from the F-4A were incorporated into the F-4B, the standard production model which entered service in 1961. The Phantom was a public relations hit for both McDonnell-Douglas and the Navy, setting 16 records for speed, altitude, and climb, some of which lasted more than a decade. But while the public thrilled to promotions, pilot reception was a different story. Objections and discontent ranged from the petty to the serious. On the superficial side, the Phantom simply wasn't sexy. No one ever accused the Phantom of being beautiful in the classic aeronautical sense. It soon acquired nicknames such as the Double Ugly, Big Iron Sled, Rhino, and the Flying Brick. At 63 feet in length and over 41,000 pounds normal operational weight, the Phantom was a big and heavy aircraft. Even though the J-79s gave the F-4 an exceptional thrust-to-weight ratio of 0.83, tremendous acceleration and high speed, all things pilots loved, the Phantom maneuvered like a truck. Not only could the Phantom not turn on a dime, it couldn't turn on a whole roll of them. Furthermore, the Phantom was sensitive and required a light hand on the controls. The early models were easily subject to PIO, pilot-induced oscillation, a feedback loop of accelerating overcorrection which could quickly cause the aircraft to, in pilot lingo, depart from controlled flight, a problem which killed 3 Phantom pilots, including an accomplished test pilot, in as many years. The J-79s were also notoriously smoky, prompting the classic Phantom driver joke that the Russians didn't need a radar to detect a Phantom. All that they had to do was follow the smoke. Furthermore, the J-79's power came with a voracious appetite for fuel, requiring the extra weight and drag of external fuel tanks for long missions, as well as frequent mid-air refueling, a sensitive, time-consuming, attention-demanding, and fatiguing operation. The F-4 was an intensely manual aircraft that imposed a heavy pilot workload. Many systems were mechanical, and the abundant electronics, over 30,000 individual components and 3 miles of wiring, were a mixture of old analog vacuum tube technology with newer solid-state circuit boards. These systems were bulky, delicate, and produced a great amount of heat and numerous clashing electromagnetic fields, leading to constant glitches, dropouts, blown circuit breakers, interference, outright failures, and much general squirreliness. Both cockpits were crammed full of buttons, switches, dials, levers, wheels, mechanical displays, and traditional gauges. The ergonomics were frustrating, as no one seemed to have asked a pilot where the best place was for any of it. This made the Phantom a very heads-down aircraft to fly, and pilots focused too much in the cockpit and quickly lose situational awareness. The 2-man crew requirement, which was supposed to help alleviate this burden, only ended up antagonizing many pilots. No one likes a backseat driver or someone looking over their shoulder, a truth doubly so for fighter pilots, who viewed the gib, guy in back, as an accusation that they weren't skilled enough or man enough to handle their own aircraft. All in all, for Navy and Marine pilots, the Phantom was the aircraft they had, and not the aircraft they wanted. Indeed, if things had not changed, the F-4 may well have had a relatively short and mediocre career. However, things did change, and dramatically so. The first of these changes came when the Air Force, under pressure from Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, chose to adopt the F-4. Many in the Air Force objected on different grounds. However, what the Air Force needed was a new fighter bomber, and the Phantom's rugged frame, high power, and 9 weapons hardpoints allowed it to carry over 18,000 pounds of bombs, twice as much as a World War II B-17 bomber. The Air Force's version of the Phantom, the F-4C, had its first flight in May of 1963, and by November, the first production models were entering service. With over 1,000 eventually built, the F-4C more than doubled the number of Phantoms in service and made the Air Force its primary operator, ensuring the future of the Phantom as America's main tactical fighter for the next 20 years. And thus it was that in 1964, the Air Force was in the process of converting many of its squadrons over to the F-4C when events on the other side of the world suddenly changed everything.
Roger, if I'm coming in from the southeast, I have you in sight now. I'm just up to maybe to 3 o'clock from behind.
Roger, no show on you yet, but the target from my position now is about 11 or 12 o'clock, about 1 mile in the valley over there.
You go ahead and mark it, and I'll give you is it right about where that smoke is coming up from right now?
Okay, it's about a mile down the valley to the east from that smoke.
Guided by the small observation plane close above the green battlefields of Vietnam, the Marine airstrike dives on target. Viet Cong's strong point has been broken by the precise application of air power, a vital part of this unusual war in which the political, economic, and psychological factors demand as much consideration as the military. Now the men of Lima Company, 1st Marines, are able to move forward because of the skillful use of an aircraft superbly adapted to supporting the riflemen in ground combat, the F-4B all-weather fighter, the Phantom.
Like all bad ideas, it seemed like a good idea at first. Many in the United States were convinced that if America did not support its ally, South Vietnam, in its civil war against China and Russia's ally, North Vietnam, that communism would progressively claim Southeast Asian nations like a chain of falling dominoes. That ultimately this did not happen is the American victory in Vietnam. That ultimately, after 10 years of bloody, divisive, and ruinous war, the United States withdrew from Vietnam and left its ally to fall, is the American tragedy of the Vietnam War. Air power played a central role in Vietnam. The United States and its allies dropped more than 7.5 million tons of bombs on Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. Double the amount dropped on Europe and Asia during World War II. It was the largest aerial bombardment in human history. The U.S. Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps flew over 5 million sorties, of which 2.8 million were strikes against ground targets. Though the United States employed many different types of aircraft in Vietnam, the Phantom was the most numerous, and it bore the weight and the brunt of the war. Altogether, the United States lost 3,744 aircraft of all types to all causes. Of these, 761 were Phantoms, 528 from the Air Force, and 233 from the Navy and Marines. 1 out of every 8 Phantoms ever built were lost in Vietnam. The Phantom had been designed to fight a war at supersonic speed at high altitude over a vast oceanic battleground, defending carrier groups and convoys with smart missiles, designed to destroy an enemy at ranges beyond the sight of its pilots. It was a war everyone expected would be won or lost within weeks, even days. The war the Phantom got was a war mostly fought at subsonic speeds and low altitude, often down to treetop level, dropping dumb iron bombs against a variety of targets, frequently in direct support of troops on the ground. It was a war that lasted 10 years. Over Vietnam, American pilots faced a well-armed enemy with an air defense network more formidable than that of Germany in World War II. Of all the threats the Phantom faced, the most deadly was anti-aircraft fire. From civilians, Viet Cong rebels, and North Vietnamese troops, pilots faced a constant barrage of hostile fire. The greatest killer was the so-called Golden BB, a manifestation of the statistical certainty that if you fired enough bullets and shells into the air, sooner or later, one of them was going to hit something vital. There was little to nothing a pilot could do to avoid the Golden BB, and even the most experienced and capable pilots could not outfly or outfight the god of statistics. North Vietnam also deployed an extensive network of Russian state-of-the-art S-75 surface-to-air missiles. Over the course of the war, the Soviet Union supplied 95 launch systems and nearly 8,000 missiles to North Vietnam, some 6,800 of which were expended to shoot down 1,000 aircraft. Of these, 53 were Phantoms. Completing North Vietnam's air defense system was the relatively small 190 aircraft at peak strength, but very dangerous Vietnamese People's Air Force. Supplied and trained by China and Russia, the North Vietnamese Air Force's singular mission was to interfere with U.S. airstrikes, primarily flying against the capital of Hanoi and the critical port of Hai Phong. For this mission, the VPAF employed 3 types of fighters. The older subsonic, cannon-armed MiG-17, the contemporary supersonic MiG-21, which carried a cannon and short-range heat-seeking missiles, and by late war, the MiG-19. All 3 were Soviet designs, smaller, lighter, and more maneuverable than the F-4. North Vietnamese pilots avoided engaging on equal terms, instead relying on ambush and hit-and-run tactics. American raids were spotted and tracked by a network of spies, observation posts, and radar. The MiGs would typically wait until a strike group had flown past their base. Then take off, climb fast, use the concealment of clouds, and make a single gun or missile attack on trailing aircraft. In World War II and the Korean War, American pilots achieved air-to-air kill ratios of 6-to-1 and 10-to-1 respectively. Quickly, however, it became painfully clear that Vietnam was going to be different. And over the first few years of the war, the United States struggled to maintain a 2-to-1 exchange rate. There were a number of reasons for this. Geography constrained the battle space, forcing aircraft to use narrow and predictable avenues of approach and withdrawal, all of which were well covered by North Vietnam's network of spies, spotters, and radar. This allowed the North Vietnamese to precisely choose when and where to engage. Furthermore, for much of the war, North Vietnamese air bases were off-limits to airstrikes for fear of killing Chinese and Russian technicians, trainers, and advisors, thus risking an escalation of the war. Due to the crowded airspace over Vietnam, American pilots were required to visually identify their targets before firing. The MiGs, being smaller than the F-4, were harder to spot, while the Phantom's notoriously smoky engines made them easily visible to the enemy. This need to visually identify a potential target also deprived the Phantom of its primary advantage, a powerful radar and long-range missiles. Thus, most air combat over Vietnam happened at short range, gun range, precisely the weapon which no one thought the Phantom would ever need. It was bad enough to have brought missiles to a gunfight. Worse when those missiles didn't work. Between heat, humidity, and the stresses of combat, the sensitive electronics of the Sparrow failed 2/3 of the time, and the heat-seeking Sidewinder nearly half. And when they did work, they missed more than they hit. Finally, since the operative assumption of the era was that missiles had rendered dogfighting obsolete, American pilots were well trained in every aspect of their job except air combat maneuvering. The United States Air Force, as a grim joke went, had become the world's foremost trainer of future airline pilots. And thus it was, at the nadir of the air war, American pilots struggled to break even against the MiGs, and North Vietnam's air defenses were shooting down 1 out of every 40 sorties over Hanoi and Haiphong. Bad odds when a tour of duty was 100 missions. This was the crucible in which the Phantom's legend was forged, the crisis which brought out the strengths of the F-4's design, and the catalyst which accelerated its evolution and transformation. In combat, the guy in back, originally resented, became an invaluable asset. Crews formed close bonds and learned how to work as one. The size and weight which put the Phantom at a disadvantage in a dogfight, and the twin engines whose smoke gave the F-4 away, also made it harder to kill and more likely to bring its crew home. Furthermore, these qualities made the Phantom a highly adaptable aircraft, capable of supporting upgrades, refits, and modifications of all kinds. One of the most important of these adaptations was an innovative solution to the Phantom's lack of a gun. Engineers took the excellent M61A1 Vulcan 20mm cannon and mounted it in a pod which could be carried on a hardpoint. Capable of firing 6,000 rounds per minute, the Vulcan was a powerful weapon for both ground attack and air-to-air combat. Development of the F-4 continued throughout the war, with the Air Force receiving the Phantom D and E, and the Navy and Marines the Phantom J. The new variants featured improved sensors, avionics, weapons, engines, and control surfaces, all of which made the Phantom more maneuverable and more lethal. The F-4E, the most numerous of all Phantom models, also featured an internal Vulcan cannon mounted underneath the nose, and new smokeless models of the J-79. In the early years of the war, the U.S. Air Force had no integrated and coordinated ground control network like that of North Vietnam, resulting in many losses from simple lack of intelligence and battlefield awareness. In 1972, the Air Force created the T-Ball Control Center, where radar, signals intelligence, and reconnaissance data were integrated to provide pilots with real-time updates on enemy activity. After T-Ball, the Air Force lost only 6 aircraft in ambushes, while shooting down 26 MiGs. In March of 1969, the Navy took steps to address the lack of air-to-air combat training, opening the Navy Fighter Weapons School, more popularly known as Top Gun. Top Gun rigorously trained selected crews in advanced air combat tactics, doctrine, and systems, and sent them back to their units to pass on what they had learned. Top Gun proved so successful that the Air Force began its own advanced fighter training program, Exercise Red Flag, in 1975. Both programs continue to this day, having trained generations of American and Allied nation fighter pilots, a direct legacy of the F-4 Phantom and the Vietnam War. The United States withdrew its last ground troops from Vietnam in March of 1973. Sporadic airstrikes continued until the fall of South Vietnam in April of 1975. By war's end, American pilots were downing MiGs at a 4-to-1 ratio. With the final tally, 196 MiGs killed, or 86 aircraft lost. 151 MiGs fell to Phantoms, 108 by the Air Force, 40 by the Navy, and 3 by the Marines, for a loss of 41 Phantoms. After a decade of war, the Phantom was a very different aircraft than it had been at the beginning. The interceptor that many pilots had begrudgingly accepted had become the most capable and combat-proven multi-role fighter in the world. This evolution had come at the price of hundreds of aircraft and the lives of over 300 Phantom aircrew. Their sacrifice, in turn, saved the lives of thousands of American soldiers who depended upon the Phantom's timely and lethal ground support. And it left both a technological and a doctrinal legacy that fundamentally reshaped American air power, a legacy that endures to this day. Just how did the Phantom, the ugly and imperfect aircraft that no one really wanted, become an aviation legend? Was it by the potential of its unique and inspired design? Was it its raw power and rugged endurance? Was it its remarkable flexibility and adaptability? Or was it the Phantom's long service and formidable record in combat? It was all these things, and also none of them. Legends, after all, aren't born. They are made. And airplanes do not make themselves. They do not fly themselves. They do not maintain themselves. Nor do they show great prowess and courage in battle. People do these things. What then is the Phantom? Is it a brutal and terrifying weapon of war, or a beautiful and masterful expression of engineering and the aeronautical arts? Is it an icon and symbol of the great and turbulent times from which our own time was born? Or the avatar of man's timeless quest to be free of the shackles which bind us to earth, to take wing and fly? Whatever we see in the Phantom is, in the end, only a phantom of our own imagination and a reflection of ourselves. And thus here is the real mystery of the Phantom's story, that a legendary aircraft can only be made legendary by a legendary people, a people whose legend is made visible in the things which they have made. The Phantom's legend was born in Vietnam. But it did not end there. It grew by war in the hands of Israeli, Iranian, and Turkish pilots, and it was cemented in peace by long service to many nations. The last of 5,195 Phantoms was delivered in 1981. Today, only a few hundred remain. Yet, in the skies over South Korea, Turkey, Iran, and Greece, at least for now, legends still lie.
Frank.